I started feeling strange about 3 weeks into my first semester at college. Nothing major at first, just excessive tiredness and occasional dizziness in the mornings. My roommate Emma was always super concerned, bringing me water and suggesting I should take better care of myself since college can be overwhelming. She'd even started making me chamomile tea before bed, saying it would help me sleep better. Being away from home for the first time, I appreciated having such a thoughtful roommate. The first real red flag came when I woke up one morning to find my desk chair in a different position than where I'd left it. I distinctly remembered pushing it under my desk before going to bed, but now it was angled toward my bed. When I mentioned this to Emma, she suggested I must have moved it during my late-night study session. But I hadn't studied the night before. I'd gone straight to bed after drinking my tea. She just smiled and said, "Lack of sleep must be affecting my memory." Things got worse when I started noticing gaps in my memory. I'd wake up with my clothes slightly disheveled or my hair tied differently than how I went to bed. One morning, I found a small bruise on my arm that I couldn't explain. Emma always had a reasonable explanation. I must have bumped into something, or maybe I was sleepwalking. She suggested I install a sleep tracking app on my phone to monitor my movements at night. The breaking point came when I received a strange message on TikTok. Someone using an anonymous account had liked several of my old videos and sent me a DM. "You look so peaceful when you sleep." I felt my blood run cold. I immediately blocked the account, but something made me scroll through their profile first. The account was empty except for a single draft video. It wouldn't play, but the thumbnail showed what looked like someone sleeping in a dorm room. That night, I pretended to drink my tea but poured it into a plant when Emma wasn't looking. I fought to stay awake, lying still in my bed, controlling my breathing to appear asleep. Around 2 a.m., I heard Emma's bed creak. Through barely open eyes, I watched her silently cross the room and grab her phone from her desk. She pulled my desk chair over to my bed, positioned it perfectly, and sat down. The soft blue light of her phone screen illuminated her face as she pointed the camera at me. My heart was pounding so hard I was afraid she would hear it. She sat there for almost an hour, occasionally adjusting her phone's position or checking something on her laptop. When she finally went back to bed, I waited another hour before silently packing a bag with my essentials. I left a note for my RA and went straight to campus security. They found a folder on Emma's laptop containing hundreds of videos of me sleeping, dating back to the first week of school. They also found empty pill packets and a detailed journal documenting her nighttime photography project. Emma was expelled and arrested. The police found social media accounts where she'd been sharing clips of me and other previous roommates. They told me she had done this at 2 other colleges before transferring here. I still can't sleep without checking my room thoroughly, and I've developed a fear of tea that I don't think will ever go away. Sometimes I wonder how many videos of me are still out there, how many people have watched me sleep without my knowledge. But mostly, I wonder about all those nights I can't remember, and what else might have happened while I was unconscious. I'd been driving for Uber for about 8 months, mostly night shifts because the money was better. That Friday night was particularly slow. A steady drizzle had kept most people indoors. I was about to call it quits when a pickup request came through from an industrial area on the outskirts of town. The surge pricing made it too tempting to pass up. The pickup location was behind a row of warehouses, most of them seemingly abandoned. My headlights swept across empty loading docks and chain-link fences as I pulled up to the pin on my GPS. A man emerged from the shadows, wearing a dark raincoat and carrying 2 large duffel bags. He struggled with their weight, dragging them across the wet pavement. I popped the trunk without getting out, standard protocol for rideshare drivers. The trunk slammed shut, and he got into the back seat. The destination was a storage facility about 40 minutes away. He was well dressed under the raincoat, expensive watch, manicured nails. Not the usual type you'd find in this area at 2 a.m. The bags had left dark streaks on his coat. I assumed they were wet from the rain until I caught a glimpse of the stains in my rearview mirror. They were too dark, too red. 10 minutes into the ride, I noticed a smell. At first, I thought it was just the rain and warehouse district's industrial stench. But this was different. Metallic, organic, getting stronger. My passenger kept checking his phone, occasionally mumbling to himself. Water was dripping from the bags onto my car's floor mats, but it wasn't clear like rainwater. It was leaving dark stains that looked black in the passing streetlights. We merged onto the highway, and the smell became unbearable. I cracked my window, trying to be subtle. That's when I heard it, a distinct sloshing sound from the trunk every time we hit a bump. My passenger noticed my glance in the rearview mirror and smiled. "Careful with the speed bumps," he said. "I've got some delicate items back there." My hands were shaking on the steering wheel. The GPS showed 25 minutes remaining. I considered pulling over, making an excuse about car trouble. Then I saw him pull something from his coat pocket. It glinted in the darkness. He kept it low, out of sight, but I knew what it was. "Just keep driving," he said softly. "We're almost there." I tried to press the emergency button on my app without him noticing, but he saw my hand move. "Phone on the dashboard now." His voice was ice cold. I complied, mind racing. The smell was making me dizzy, or maybe it was fear. The sloshing in the trunk continued with every bump, and I couldn't stop thinking about what or who was in those bags. At the storage facility, he directed me to a unit at the far end, away from the security cameras. As I pulled up, another car's headlights swept across us. My passenger ducked down, cursing. It was a security patrol. I slammed on the gas, tires screeching on the wet pavement. He lunged forward, but the sudden movement sent him off balance. I heard the metallic clatter of something falling to the floor. I drove straight to the police station, running every red light. He tried to grab me several times, but I swerved erratically, keeping him off balance. When I screeched to a stop in front of the station, he bolted, leaving everything behind. The police found his weapon on the floor of my car, a long hunting knife with a serrated edge. They wouldn't tell me exactly what was in the bags, but their faces when they opened the trunk told me everything I needed to know. They caught him 3 days later trying to cross the state line. The detective said I'd helped them crack a series of missing persons cases spanning several states. I quit driving for rideshare services that same week. When it rains, I still catch phantom whiffs of that metallic smell. Every time I see someone with a duffel bag, my heart stops for a moment. But what haunts me most is knowing that if that security guard hadn't driven by at that exact moment, I might have been the next person reported missing. Working as a heavy equipment operator for Marshall Construction meant I was usually the first person on site. That morning, we were breaking ground on a new apartment complex in an old industrial district. The lot had been vacant for decades after the textile factory burned down in the 90s. The demolition crew had already cleared most of the ruins, leaving us with a clean slate to begin foundation work. The first anomaly appeared during the initial excavation. My bucket struck something metallic about 8 feet down, not unusual for an old industrial site. But as I cleared away more soil, I noticed these weren't typical factory remnants. The metal pieces were too small, too uniform. They looked like jewelry. Cheap stuff, mostly corroded, but distinctive enough to catch my attention. By mid-morning, we'd exposed what appeared to be an old sub-basement that wasn't on any of our site plans. The wooden support beams were still intact, preserved by the depth and soil composition. The space was roughly 15 feet square, with walls made of stacked concrete blocks. Something about its layout felt wrong. This wasn't standard industrial architecture. During lunch break, I examined the soil layers more closely. Years of working construction sites had taught me to read the earth like a book, There were distinct dark bands in the walls of our excavation, evidence of multiple digging events. Someone had repeatedly opened and refilled this pit over time. The factory fire story suddenly felt convenient, a way to explain why this area had remained untouched for so long. I checked the historical site documents in our project trailer. The factory's blueprint showed no basement in this area. More concerning were the dates. The fire had occurred in 1992, but the soil layers suggested activity well into the 2000s. I started researching local news archives on my phone. Multiple women had disappeared from this area between 1990 and 2010. The cases remained unsolved. After the other workers left for the day, I returned to the pit. Something had been nagging at me about the debris we'd uncovered. Among the metal pieces was what looked like a weathered leather wallet. Inside, I found a deteriorated driver's license. The photo was unrecognizable, but the expiration date was 2005, long after the factory closed. That night, I couldn't sleep. I drove back to the site around midnight, telling myself I just needed to confirm my suspicions. The security guard knew me and waved me through. I took my personal metal detector, a hobby tool I used for weekend treasure hunting. Within an hour, I had mapped out dozens of metallic signatures in a grid pattern across the sub-basement floor. The police excavation lasted 2 weeks. They found 23 sets of remains, along with hundreds of personal effects that helped identify the victims. The killer had used the factory fire as cover to establish his disposal site, then kept using it for years afterward. The detectives said it was one of the largest burial grounds they'd ever uncovered. The investigation is still ongoing. They identified the killer through DNA evidence. A former security guard who'd worked at the factory and stayed on as a night watchman for the vacant lot until his death in 2012. He'd been hiding in plain sight, protecting his burial ground for decades. The apartment complex project was canceled. They're turning the site into a memorial garden instead. I still operate excavators, but something changed after that discovery. Every scoop of earth now carries the possibility of uncovering something terrible. I've learned that evil can lurk just beneath the surface, buried under layers of dirt and time. I dream about those metallic signatures in my detector, 23 points of light in the darkness, each one representing a life cut short, waiting years to be found.